Hey, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? AnyPride here, and I've got some multiplayer action coming your way this evening. My previous replays have been going more towards the cinematic side of things, but this game is going to be a little bit more tactical in nature. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on how to deal with dwarf armies and how to utilize the lore of metal in tandem with greatswords and skirmish fire effectively against dwarf builds. This battle was played against the Prussian Prince, a very talented tournament player and YouTuber in the Total War scene, but this was only his second multiplayer battle, and only like my 8th or something like that, so neither of us have a ton of experience at the moment. We're just trying to work out some efficient builds. Prussian Prince will be playing as the Dwarfs with a heavy focus on cheap troops. His core will be the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, a cheap armor-piercing alternative to some of the other more expensive Dwarf troops like Hammerers or Ironbreakers. And on top of that, he's got 4 Quarrelers and 2 Thunderers. Crossbows will outrange my Handgunners by 25, so they're a very useful unit against the Empire. And out on both flanks that you see now, he's got some Gyrocopters with brimstone guns, and they are going to be going after my Outriders, which are a very useful skirmish unit for the Empire. So this is not really the engagement a Empire Outrider unit really wants to be in. They don't want to be trading shots with units that can shoot back at them. They're really good at harassing flanks and shooting at stuff from behind, but when they're getting shot back at, they don't have great armor. They will drop models pretty quickly. So I am going to just turn around and start opening fire. They don't have Parthian shot, unfortunately, which means they can't shoot while they're running away. But I am going to pull off one of my Empire handgun contingents and start firing into the Gyrocopters. Be able to take some damage off of them. They get them down to about half HP. My Lord character in this battle will be Balthasar Gelt on a Pegasus. He is the famous Gold Wizard, a Lore of Metal caster who can buff and debuff very efficiently. His Vortex and damage spells are honestly pretty atrocious, especially against dwarves who have an innate 25% magic resistance. So I do not recommend using Gehenna's Golden Hounds or Searing Doom on the Lore of Metal. They simply don't do enough damage right now for their Winds of Magic cost, and they can be difficult to land anyway. So instead, I'll be focusing on flying him around to engagements where he's needed, dropping Plague of Rust on enemy dwarf units, which will lower their armor by 15 and allow my armor-piercing greatswords and handgunners to rip them apart. Now, you can see how the Quarrelers on the dwarf line are quite a good investment against an Empire gun line. They do outrange me. I've already lost one of my handgunners. They will come back, but they're down to about half HP, and my handgunners have now moved up into range of his Thunders and have started opening fire. Basically, my tactics this battle are going to revolve around kiting with my handgunners, focus firing units that get hit with Plague of Rust, and getting my greatswords into combat with the inferior but more numerous dwarf warriors with great weapons. You can see my handgunners pulling away from this engagement now. I do have slightly better mobility than the dwarf infantry, and I'm going to follow it up with a charge from the greatswords, which will do quite a bit of damage. The greatswords cost 975, I believe the dwarf warriors with great weapons cost 575, and my greatswords do have a 10 bonus versus infantry, which means they will rip them apart, especially when I cast Plague of Rust on the dwarf warriors. They are going to get slaughtered in combat there. My greatsword should have a great time in melee over there. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get the 10 bonus versus infantry units, the greatswords, into combat, and then casting Plague of Rust, debuffing the high armor, the 80 to 100 armor values of the dwarf warriors, and basically I'll be able to shred them in melee combat and hit them from the flank with my handgunners. My Reichsguard have moved into a flanking position here. They're going straight for the organ gun. They're going to take quite a lot of losses in the back here. I've kind of been struggling with cavalry, honestly. They often don't really pay for themselves. They're quite expensive to field. 1,200 talents for the Reichsguard. I'm going to kill the organ gun, which is great. It's about 1,000 or 1,200 talent weapon, but they are going to drop. The Reichsguard are going to drop in the back. They're getting shot by some handgunners and quarrelers, so they'll be off the field, but I have taken off one of his most important artillery pieces. So greatswords getting ready to go for another charge here, and again, Plague of Rust from Balthasar Gelt going off, going to lower their armor from 80 down to, I believe, 65. Or those are the Longbeards, actually, so they'll have even higher armor value. These Longbeards will have a very tough time with their armor reduced by 15. Greatswords having that bonus versus infantry. They'll have a good time in that engagement, and I have my handgunners firing in from the flank as well. So yeah, my greatswords so far have done a really good job against the dwarf line. I think Prussian Prince might have needed to invest in a few more elite dwarf units to really hold the line, particularly well, but he does have the numbers advantage, so we'll see how that plays out for him. Balthasar Gelt again casting Plague of Rust and charging in from the flank. He's going to start doing some damage there, and I'm constantly buffing my units over on this side to make sure that they're winning that engagement. They're now tied up with Dwarf Warriors with great weapons and Longbeards, but the Dwarfs, who are outnumbering me, didn't actually get a flanking charge in this engagement, and so they're really not using their numbers to their advantage. Balthasar Gelt is going to pull out of that engagement soon and go for another spot on the line where he senses some weakness. You see my Greatswords are now pushing back Thorgrim Grudgebearer in the center. I casted Accuse, the single target ability from the Witch Hunter. Gonna take Thorgrim down about to 2/3 HP. Accuse is too strong in my opinion. Too strong right now, in my opinion. It can do a lot of damage. I saw it on an Eric Carthage video take Grimgor all the way down to 1/3 health after a single cast. So it's pretty insane, but that is gonna push Thorgrim back. And now I'm going to be casting Glittering Robe on my Greatswords, which is going to give them a +8 leadership bonus and 15 armor. The Dwarfs, some of the routing units, did come back and get a rear charge off, but only a handful. There were about 35 or 40 guys who got the rear charge off, and that was right when I buffed them, my Greatswords, with the Glittering Robe, which made them get a big morale buff and a big armor buff, which allowed them to take that charge and still win the engagement quite handily. So the Prussian Prince was upset that my Greatswords were able to beat back 4 units on that flank even after being surrounded, but I'd argue that the constant buffing and debuffing from the Lore of Metal let them do extremely well in that melee, not to mention the fact that rear charge he got off was only from a handful of severely depleted low-tier dwarfs. In the center, my Greatswords are pushing back his Quarrelers, actually going to be able to catch up to them. This part I did not understand. They are tired, and they have a speed of 28, while the Quarrelers have a speed of 30, and yet I was still able to catch up to them, which was very strange. I would love an explanation if someone could give me one. I have no idea. But Thorgrim Grudgebearer is going to end up going into combat here. He's going to be able to start smacking around my Greatswords. But honestly, after getting accused and after getting surrounded by a ton of armor-piercing Greatswords, he's not going to have a good time over there. Witch Hunter is tied down by some dwarfs with great weapons. He is actually a single-target duelist. He's much better against single-target units than he is against an entire unit. So I'm not actually utilizing my Witch Hunter very effectively right now, and I'm not quite in range to get another Accuse off on Thorgrim Grudgebearer, which is what I would love to be doing right now. That's really where he shines, when he's using that single-target Accuse ability on enemy heroes and enemy lords. So Greatswords have broken through the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. Closing in now, this is going to be a really tough engagement for the Dwarfs. Prussian Prince not going to be able to pull back in time, and they're going to get charged. And that is going to be pretty much the end of the game. I mean, there's not a whole lot left he can do. The Balthasar Gelt is going to cast another Plague of Rust. I think that's like the 5th or 6th time in this battle I've been able to cast it. It's just so much more efficient use of your Winds of Magic to use Plague of Rust 5 or 6 times than use Gehenna's Golden Hounds twice and have it not even hit them, like just spin off in some random direction. I think Lore of Metal might be one of the best lores against the Dwarfs, because you're not actually using damage spells against them, you're just debuffing them. Debuffing their armor, which is one of the most important things, is the tankiness of the Dwarf line, and basically using the armor-piercing weapons from the Greatswords and the armor-piercing shots from the Handgunners in tandem with that Plague of Rust debuff. It's just a really good combination. I think it's one of the best ways to deal with Dwarf infantry lines. Certainly just running into them from the front like a chicken with your head cut off is not a great way to engage the Dwarfs. You have to be use a little bit more finesse here, and I think outranging them, out-skirmishing them, and using those great swords for the killing power in your army is probably the best way to do it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll bring you some more content very soon.